WRX or STI. I don't blame you. These things are so much fun. But let's talk about what happens when you buy them privately. In this video, I'm going to show you guys what to look out for on a used Subaru to make sure that doesn't happen to you guys. All right, guys, so this behind me is my 2012 Subaru WRX, and we're going to be going over some of the main things to look at on these cars before you buy it. I've had some pretty good luck with this car besides a little bit of maintenance. It's been a lot. Link to the video talking about maintenance in the description, but let's go over the first thing, which is modifications to these cars. So when it comes to modifications on these cars, you want to try to buy one that has as little modifications as possible. The reason is things like intakes, things like downpipes, they require a tune, and lots of modifications need a tune, and Subarus are really picky. And if the car didn't have the proper tune on the car for the parts, there could be some internal engine damages, there could be some detonation going on in the engine, and it's best just to stay away from those. So if you can, buy things that have little to no modifications. Things like an aftermarket bypass valve is okay. If it has a catback exhaust, it's okay. If it's a blow-off valve, that's not good if it's not tuned for it. And look for evidence that the intake has been taken off, and look for evidence as well on the downpipe and see if the heat shield's been taken off or if it's an aftermarket downpipe. Those are two big modifications that if it doesn't have a tune for, it's not going to be running right. With an intake, it's probably going to be leaning out a bit. And even with the downpipe as well, it has a possibility of leaning out as well. The other important thing when it comes to modifications is if the car has emissions, the parts taken off. So things like a catless downpipe, things like TGV deletes, secondary air pump deletes, and EGR deletes, I would recommend to stay away from those cars if you are planning to modify them further. With the new update that Cobb released, where they're not going to be allowed to tune out certain emissions control devices like catalytic converters, the TGVs, you're going to have a pretty rough time going forward with your modifications, because before you can modify it further, you have to put those emissions control devices back on, and the TGVs are super hard to change. Those are the key things to look at for modifications. Try to get one that has little to no modifications, and if it does have modifications, ensure it has the proper tune on the part. The next big thing that we're going to talk about is the maintenance, so let's get into that. Some of the big ticket items on these cars come with spark plugs, timing belts. Those are the two big things you want to look at and make sure they were done. Both of them need to be done around 150,000 kilometers. Spark plugs maybe a little bit earlier. Typically, your timing belt isn't going to make it to 150. That's what Subaru recommends. Most shops would say about 100 to 120,000 kilometers is your best range to do these maintenance items at, to ensure that the timing belt won't break and to ensure that there won't be any detonation with old plugs in the engine. Another big thing you'd want to take a look at is to see if the short block or the turbo have been replaced. It is kind of hard to take a look if the previous owner doesn't know if it's been done, and if there's no scheduled maintenance that was done, if the guy did it himself. The reason you want to look at that is it kind of gives you a picture of what the vehicle was driven like before. There is a chance that it was just a bad motor and ringland failure just happened on the motor. But there's also a chance that if that's happened, if the motor's been changed, the turbo has been changed, the trans has been changed, that's a good indication that previous owners or this owner has not been treating the car too well, and there could be issues elsewhere, say issues in the head that weren't taken care of when it was rebuilt, or further issue with the trans. And the other big things is just make sure that oil changes, all of that were done at the right time on these cars. It's super important for fresh oil to be in, especially a Subaru. So make sure they were done every 5,000 kilometers or so. If not earlier is even better. And just make sure all the fluids have been properly changed and taken care of. The next thing that we're going to talk about is exterior body damage and exterior modifications. When it comes to the exterior of Subarus, their paint is really soft. If you look around my car, especially on the top here, you can see a lot of chips. This won't focus, but there's a lot of chips in the front of that on the hood. You also have chips on the back door here. There's some chips on the roof. The paint's just really bad on Subarus, and you just want to make sure that if there are chips, I've been pretty bad for this, but make sure that they're being filled with paint so that they don't start rusting like the top of my roof has started doing. The other thing you're going to want to do is try to feel underneath the front bumper. See if there's any drill marks in there from a front splitter being put in. Look at the back to see if there's been a diffuser put in. Look for if there's potentially coilovers on the car. Look for any evidence that the car has been modified on the outside. It's not the end of the world if there have been these exterior mods, but there could be some holes, say, in the side of the bumper if there were canards, or there could be some holes in the trunk if they put a different spoiler on it. And just take a look at that, and if you'd want to take those parts with the vehicle, if you want to take those extra body damage on the vehicle. The final thing you want to look at, and arguably the most important part, is performance issues and how the car drives. The first thing that you want to do when you take a look at these cars, after letting it sit for about 10-15 minutes, you want to check the oil. You want to see if it's low on oil, or if there's previously been oil added into it. What I mean by this is if the guy's close to 5,000 kilometers on the oil change, you'd figure that the oil would be kind of dark. If you pull the dipstick and it's pretty clear, there's a good indication that the previous owner had just added oil because it's been low on oil. Typically, a Subaru burning oil isn't the end of the world. I burn about 1 liter of oil per oil change. But if it has been burning a substantial amount of oil, that probably means that there's an issue with the rings or an issue elsewhere in the motor, and you won't want to purchase the car. But once you get the car started up, you want to just listen to the engine. There is going to be some ticks. You'll typically hear some ticks coming from the heads, and those ticks are going to be your fuel injectors. The engines do run pretty loud, so there are going to be some sounds that might not sound normal to a normal vehicle. That is normal for a Subaru. But what you want to be listening for when you rev it up a bit is if it has any noise that sounds like that first clip where that was rod knock. If there's rod knock, stay away from the vehicle. You're going to have to rebuild the short block. The next thing you're going to want to look at is out the exhaust. When you start the car up, if any blue smoke or white smoke comes out, typically that's a sign that there is a ringland issue with the car. And you're going to want to probably stay away from it because you're going to have to rebuild your short block as well. The final thing you want to do while it's running is pull your oil cap off. And if you see a lot of white or blue smoke shooting out of the oil cap while it's running, that's another sign similar to the exhaust that you do have a potential ringland issue. So once you get into the car, you want to look at a lot of stuff. Make sure a lot of the parts work in here. My vent is kind of broken there. Make sure that in the back, all the panels are there. Make sure all the buttons and everything here work. Especially make sure that your air conditioning works. I don't know if this is just my luck, but I had the AC broken when I bought the car, spent $1,400 fixing the AC just for it to break again on me. I don't know if it's just my car has been an issue with this, or if this is an issue with all Subarus, but just take a look at that. Another thing you want to look at on the floor is look at the pedals and see if the clutch, one, feels normal, and two, make sure there's no squeaks or creaking with it. An issue with these cars, especially my generation here, the 08 to 14s, they have a really bad firewall, which has some spot welds on it that start cracking, and essentially the firewall starts pushing apart, and you're going to hear a squeak through your clutch, and if that's happened on the car, there is a possibility that you lose all control of your clutch. So if that's happened, it's about a $1,400 to $1,500 fix with them taking the dash off and drilling holes through the firewall and putting bolts through it. So that's one thing you're going to want to listen for when you push the clutch to the ground, and also make sure the clutch just kind of feels normal. You don't have any weird starts with it. You don't feel the clutch getting super hard or super soft. Just make sure it feels normal. So now comes the fun part. What you want to start doing is you want to take it for a test drive. There are certain things you want to do with the car. You do want to hit boost. You want to make sure it feels like it's making enough pounds of boost. If it has an access port in the car, that's huge, and I'll show you what to monitor on it in a moment here. And just make sure that everything just feels right with the car. Make sure there's no sound of a misfire. Make sure it doesn't smell like stuff's burning. Just normal stuff that you look for with a vehicle, and you should hopefully be good to go. When it comes to the access port, these are the 6 monitors you'd want to have pulled up when you're driving. You want to see your boost gauge, your dynamic advanced multiplier, feedback knock, and fine knock learn are the biggest ones. AFR is an important one as well to make sure that the car is properly tuned. Typically at idle, you'll see about 14.4 to 14.7 depending on where it's been tuned from. Wide open throttle should be about 11, and when you're off the throttle in gear, it's about 20.67 to 20.79 typically. When it comes to your DAM, feedback knock, and fine knock learn, I have a whole video about the DAM, but typically these will stay at, this should stay at 1. This one you might have a negative 1.4, negative 2.8, and feedback fine knock learn you hope to have 0 for it. And then boost, depending on where the car is tuned. If it's tuned for just the normal Cobb OTS tune, it'll be around 14 pounds. And if it's tuned by someone else, I'm tuned by Torque Performance, you'll be hitting about 17 pounds or so. And if the owner allows you, I would highly recommend you take a data log of the car and have him send that file over to you, which you can send over to a tuner, you can send that over to someone that knows Subarus, and make sure that everything is good to go. And that can help point out a lot of issues that you might not have ran into, because you can monitor only 6 with the access port, but on the data log, you can pull up a ton of different monitors. I would highly recommend getting in touch with a tuner and just getting the correct parameters set on the access port, and then send a data log over to the tuner and just see if everything looks good on that side. Tuners can typically see if it's pulling timing, if your fuel injector duty cycle's off, and can kind of tell if there are some problems with the car. But yeah, guys, those are the big things you want to look at when buying a used Subaru WRX. Even if you're buying a used one from a dealership, you want to do the same process of looking at all of these parts. And if you do that, it'll help lower your risk of having any sort of big engine problem with the car. That being said, however, these cars are expensive to own. Click the link in the description or the video up at the top right corner, and that'll go over my 2 years of ownership and how much I've spent on the car, which has came out to a good amount, even with this car being very good to me. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching the video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new. I'm going to try to be posting once a week on this channel now, every Friday. Be sure to watch out for new videos to come. Have a great day, everybody.